Mr. Salmon.
So, one related comment. So, I mean, driving a lot of this are the state reductions of funding for the university. If the state wants to have more students from California and wants more equitable funding between the campuses and wants to have better transparency in the university, then the state has to provide more funding. I think that, that's part of the problem, is that we've reacted to this decrease in state funding by running towards non-resident tuitions, students, which has increased the inequity between the campuses. And one of the plans that your body is discussing is increasing the tuition rate for non-resident tuition by $4,000 to $5,000, which will only increase the inequity. But the other part is the rebenching, as I said, is only dealing with $37 million a year out of a $3 billion state appropriation for the university. So there's no way that I see that it's going to accomplish restored equity, because it's only looking at a certain part of the state appropriations. And so once again, without more state funds, the UC is just going to be scrambling over, trying to find all these different ways of increasing revenue, which so far has increased the inequity between the campuses and has decreased the ability of students who want to go to a certain UC to go to that UC, and that's been the result.
Sure. You complete?
Yeah.
Okay. Assemblymember Joan Sawyer, and then Assemblymember Baker.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you probably can tell, this whole issue of diversity is not going to go away. And I just want to add this, because you were talking about numbers and money. Spending $3 million out of state and $20 million in state, but it seems like the out of state money is more effective at bringing in students. One, two. Money isn't always the solution, and I think you should seriously look at the $20 million you're spending, because it obviously is not working. And to continue to pour money down that drain, that hole, expecting to get a different result, is problematic. I went to a real small private college in Los Angeles where our enrollment in African Americans is much higher than UCLA's. Our tuition is twice as much as UCLA, and we've had a history of not always being accepting to minorities, except with Latino African American enrollment, it's much higher than UCLA's, and that's problematic on a lot of levels. And so, no disrespect to the people who believed in Prop 209, but if I hear another person tell me what they can't do because of Prop 209, I'm going to lose it. Because we need to start talking about what we can do in spite of 209 to get the diversity that we need. And if you haven't heard anything from this panel, the UCs better figure it out, and figure it out quick. Or we're going to try to figure it out our own selves. And from what I've learned being a bureaucrat in the system, you never want elected officials to figure out what to do. You need to figure it out on yourself. Because if we come up with a plan, it'll be swift, it'll be broad-ranging, and it'll be decisive. And so if the university truly believes in diversity, where on a campus of UCLA they have less than 3% African-American males on campus, God forbid if I take out the football team where your numbers would be, you should be ashamed and you should be embarrassed at the numbers all across the state of Latino and African-Americans that are on your campuses right now. And that should be a number one priority, and that should be an easy fix. If you're very good at going out of the country to get people to come to this school and pay an exorbitant amount of money, you should be able to figure out how to stay in-state, spend less money to recruit people to come to our schools and stay in our state and be productive members of our state, and just stop this word game. And again, I don't care if you give $100 million, if you're not getting the impact that you need, you shouldn't spend one dime, or we shouldn't give you one dime, or we should give that money to somebody else who will get the job done.
We have Assembly Member Baker and then Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo the concerns that my colleagues are raising, particularly with respect to the disparity between where funds are going in the UC system among schools. I want to drill down a little bit more on some data points with respect to non-resident students system-wide. Make sure I've got it correctly. So is it correct that there's basically been a tripling of non-resident students in the UC system over the last, I think, since 2008? Triple non-resident students. You've tripled that.
I'll pull it out, but that's roughly right, yeah.
Okay. And like Senator Roth, I went to law school because numbers weren't my big thing. But I have been able to crunch some of the numbers that you've just provided and are available. And from what I can tell, from 2008 to 2013, there's been a 182% cumulative increase in non-resident students. At the same time, resident students, it's been 3%. And that's a disparity that every California taxpayer is concerned about system-wide. That triple-digit difference between cumulative non-resident and resident students. So it draws me back to a question that I want to ask first is, where is your proof or ability to back up the idea that resident students are not being displaced?
Well, I mean, first of all, I would point out, I mean, it's something that we grapple with all the time, but that also occurred during a time when we got cut nearly $1 billion in state funding. And so we did continue to add California enrollment. And we actually, you're right, it was much smaller, but we added California enrollment even though we were getting cut from the state. One of the reasons we were able to do that is because we did have non-resident tuition. I mean, it went up about $380 million, as you noted, during that time. And that was one of the reasons. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to take more California students. We would have had lesser enrollment across the board.
Okay, well, that goes to my next question, and that it just fundamentally what the purpose of the UC system is. And because I've seen in materials that have been shared with the committee today a repeated statement, both from President Napolitano and from other sources, that the UC's priority is to enroll the number of undergraduate California residents for whom the state provides what you think is adequate funding. And I don't see anywhere in the state constitution that that's your priority. It seems to me the priority of the UC system is to educate and provide the best possible educational opportunity for California students. And when I've gone to the website of the UC System's website today, it says the only world-class research university for, by, and of California, to educate, illuminate, and serve, not to find out if there's a certain number of California residents that we think the state's provided enough funding for. So where I'm getting with this is I think the mission is getting split from what you need to be doing. And I look forward to the chairman's and the JLAC report that will be coming back to this committee, looking at this issue further. But I hope it will include a reexamination of what the purpose of the system is, which is not to just decide where to enroll California resident students if you think you've got enough funding. Wow. I do have one more question, and that goes to a little bit more specifically. The report that we got from Madam Auditor this morning mentioned that there isn't an ability within the UC system to identify how much health services, graduate students, and other features of the UC system at the graduate level are affecting the tuition disparity. Why don't you have the ability to do that? That seems like something you should be able to do by now.
Wait, repeat that. I'm not sure.
Well, one of the things we heard repeatedly from the state auditor is there was an inability of UC to provide the auditor with that information. Why do you not have that ability?
No, I think we have deciphered it. I think it's about 90% of it was explained by historic. The problem is that there were different funding levels, so you can't just say it was formulaic based on the number of health sciences students or the number of graduate students. It came about when campuses grew. So, campuses that grew those populations, significantly during the 80s when there was a significant uptick in funding for the UC were advantaged relative to ones that grew in the 90s. So, you'll see that it's not as simple as just saying, are you a health sciences campus or not? Because Irvine is funded at a far lesser rate than San Diego. And a lot of that goes to when they were adding their health sciences students. And so that's why we have basically wiped that clean, and that's why we're starting this rebenching, we will be able to allocate it based on actual enrollments of these different levels of students.
Okay, and I just remember from the testimony earlier today from the state auditor, and I may be asking the question not quite the right way, but that you weren't able to get from UC a way to break out, based on different features of the campuses, some of the data that you were looking at. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. But what I talked about in my comments is the budget process that the University of California used during the course of our audit was this incremental process. And then we were asking for the UC to quantify, as you asked in your question, how much of that disparity is related to health sciences students versus graduate students. They could not give us that incremental difference. I think and I can defer to UC, I think what they're suggesting is they've scrapped that budget process and now are using the rebenching. And I'm not sure. I don't know enough about rebenching, and the university can answer the question whether or not rebenching is going to allow them to be more specific as far as if there continues to be a disparity up until 17-18, which is what I think the chair's concern is. How is that disparity going to be narrowed, and in what ways will it be? How much of the disparity that currently exists, they're 3 years in, there's still a disparity, how much of that is specifically related to health sciences students versus graduate students? That's your question. That's what they weren't able to answer during our audit under a different budget model. Under the rebenching, again, I would defer to the university to try to answer that question.
No, the auditor is correct. Is that we couldn't unravel the way it had been done historically, so we started with a new system, and we said that state funding is going to go on a per student basis based on the type of student. And as the LAO had said, it's weighted. So an undergraduate gets 1, a academic graduate student is 2.5, and a health sciences student is 5, and there's no weighting for non-resident. Professional schools are also 1, and so going forward, we will be able to show exactly what each campus will get, and they can also target their growth where they think it's most appropriate for each campus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lara, I'm sorry, Assemblymember Williams.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of shock, but I'm starting to get shocked at the shock, because. To return to Mr. Samuel's point, and it's great to have such good talent at UCSB, and he spends a lot of his personal time in digging deep on this. This is we should not be shocked when you cut the UC by $1 billion, and we should not be shocked that they do stupid, crazy things to keep enrolling more students and meet their master plan obligation. We should not be shocked by this, and we should not be casting stones when it's our fault, when it is the legislature's fault and the executive's fault that the UC and CSU is not funded enough. So this is a worthwhile hearing. It's good. I want rebenching because I want UCSB to be funded fairly, and we all want our UCs to be funded fairly, especially because we can improve the diversity of our campuses in that way and our system. But the real core issue is what Mr. Samuel said, is are we willing to fund the UC to be able to enroll our students? Are we willing to fund them at an adequate level so that they're not doing stupid things like enrolling more out-of-state students to subsidize those in-state students? That is a fundamental question. We have to answer that, and they can't answer that. We have to.
Senator Lara.
Thank you. Well, I do agree with Assemblymember Williams, but I'm also not going to just give you a blank check without any checks and balances, because there's other issues that go far beyond funding that the UC is not addressing. And so I have a couple more questions. Mr. Ostrom mentioned that the UC has a relatively high rate of population of Pell Grant students. We know, however, given that UC does have a relatively high graduation rate, however, for Pell Grant recipients, they significantly lag behind. And my question is for the Madam Auditor, would these Pell Grant students happen to be concentrated in the 4 campuses that are underfunded?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that question, Senator.
And if we don't have that question answer, can we add that as part of the audit as well? Because it'd be interesting to see.
I can answer what the our Pell Grant students are spread throughout all of our campuses, obviously with the exception of UC San Francisco, which is entirely health sciences. The highest percentage is actually at the Merced campus, where it's close to 60%. UC Riverside is at 56%, which is really sets it apart nationally. But all of our campuses are 30% or higher. There is, you're right, in the four-year basis, there is a gap in terms of graduation rates, though I would note that UC Riverside, the graduation rate is equal for Pell Grant and non-Pell Grant, and that gap disappears by 6 years. So the 6-year graduation rate is almost identical for Pell Grant students and non-Pell Grant students.
The other question I had, when we talked about the out-of-state students, you referred to undergraduates. What are the numbers for the graduate students, and how many of those are how many of those are international students?
Graduate students it's roughly 50-50. For our professional schools, it's more Californian. But for academic graduate programs, they go out to get the best students they can in the world. There is an issue that people think that we are disadvantaging our campuses by charging them non-resident tuition, which is often paid by grants and other sources. But I'd have to get you the exact number for each campus and each discipline.
I mean, members, this is another area where we really need to look at, where the fact you have a handful of African Americans, I think it was 3 in the UCLA Law School class. I mean, that's shocking. The other thing is, my question is, we tout the UC's diversity. Are these international students counted in the diversity mix?
No, we typically, when we talk about diversity, we talk about our in-state students. And they don't qualify for Pell Grants or Cal Grants or any of those.
I know. Trust me. My last question is, what's going on with this committee of 2 between the governor and President Napolitano? What's the progress been made in this, if you know?
I know they've met once. I know that they're conferring with both in-state, in UC, and national experts on the cost structure of higher education and looking at the balance of research and teaching. I don't know much beyond that, but obviously it's critical. We believe, as I would echo Mr. Samuels and Mr. Williams, that to meet our California enrollment targets, we would like more state funding. We'd like to avoid doing a tuition increase, and so I think this is critical for establishing that framework.
Well, absolutely agree that we need to give the UC more money, but some of us are not going to be willing just to give it to you point blank. We're going to include some checks and balances. I think it's the only fair thing to do, given that it's California taxpayer money. For the new members, too, you should understand that, the regents are here for 12 years, and they don't have to come back for reconfirmation or come back to be accountable for anybody. And so this is just a warning that you're going to get a lot of lip service, and it's going to be up to us to really once and for all talk about the university's autonomy and to be able to figure out how we hold them accountable to the taxpayers of California. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Lara. I certainly echo your thoughts. I think we need to look at that process and see how do we change that process, because I believe this body should be like all the other bodies, should be not only respecting this body, the legislature, but also having this legislature hold them accountable. Senator Roth.
I agree with my colleague, Mr. Williams, on funding, and I'm certainly willing to accept my share of responsibility for funding or not funding higher education, and in particular the University of California at the appropriate level. But as I've previously indicated, I'd certainly like to get a better handle on the per-student allocation and the other funds that are available to the university that are utilized for student education in this budget-challenged environment. But my question has to do with out-of-state undergraduates versus in-state, and I'm looking at the statistics, and I thought I heard you say, sir, that the out-of-state students increased with the tuition, but in-state students did too. And my review of this graph indicates that, if I'm right, between 2007 and 2013, the out-of-state students increased about 14,000, while the in-state students increased about 5,000. I guess my question is, where did the increases occur for the in-state students? Did they occur at the schools that had the highest percentage of out-of-state students? And was it a one-for-one proposition where we take an out-of-state student, we get a bunch of money, and then we can open up another slot for a California resident? Or were the in-state student increases at the schools like UC Merced and perhaps UC Riverside or Santa Cruz? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because that actually is all the campuses did maintain their California enrollment, but a lot of the campuses that have taken more non-residents did not increase theirs. Most of the growth during that period did. I mean, Riverside went, probably from 3,000. I don't have the exact figures, but probably 3,000 to 6,000. Riverside added a large number. One of the factors that drove Riverside was that when Cal State actually cut their enrollment, they had a big increase in their enrollment in that year. So most of the growth did happen, I'd say, at Riverside, Merced. Davis actually had some in-state growth as well.
Well, then you could understand the concern that comes from some corners. If you're taking out-of-state students, obviously you're receiving a significant amount of increased revenue. But on the other hand, I assume that most of these popular institutions along the coast are challenged by the number of seats available in classrooms. And so if you fill a seat with an out-of-state student, it's a seat that a California resident cannot occupy. Hence, they apply. They don't get selected for that campus, and then they move to another campus. So I really think, I'm not in the business of being an administrator of a college or university, but I really think that's something that you all should take a look at. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I have a question. Why does it take so long? Why does it take 6 years to deal with the rebenching initiatives? That seems to be a long, exorbitant time to complete. So
yeah, and we did look at doing it in as short as 4 years or as long as 8 years. Part of it is we're taking such a big portion of the incremental state funds that if we did it in a shorter period, it would really disadvantage the campuses that don't get any from rebenching. So UCLA is at the highest level in terms of per student, and so of the portion that we set aside for rebenching, they get no additional funds. Where Santa Barbara, Riverside, Santa Cruz, those are below, get a much higher proportion of that. This year we are slated to get $119 million of funds. We're putting $37 million of that into rebenching. And so it was decided that would be the least disruptive process. And frankly, I mean, the campuses that are getting that are getting a huge influx and are pretty pleased with the rebenching process, places like Santa Cruz and Santa Barbara.
Sure. Thank you. Every university campus has a certain capacity and level of enrollment. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
With that understanding, how is the mix of residents and non-residents enrollment threshold different from the campus?
You mean why is the percentage different?
Yes.
I think most of the percentage growth has been because of the difference in reputation. Berkeley and UCLA had long-standing reputation and had always had more demand for non-residents than others. But frankly, our largest growth in the last several years has come at Santa Barbara, at Davis, at Irvine, where they have seen a lot of increases in non-residents. I believe that all of our campuses have the ability to attract more non-residents, and frankly, some of those campuses also have the ability to add capacity. Riverside can grow significantly, Merced can grow significantly, Santa Cruz can grow significantly. It's places like UCLA and Berkeley where they are more constrained in terms of their ability to add a number of students.
Great.